Hi everyone, welcome to the first video ever from the Geeky Gimp. And today we're interviewing Eduardo Baraf, who you may know from my review of his first game, Murder of Crows, which you can read on my blog. Today's interview is about his new game, Liftoff, which you can find on Kickstarter. We also discuss his design process and how he feels about accessibility in gaming. If you have any questions or comments, just drop me a line on my blog or in the video. I hope you enjoy. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Eduardo Baraf, and I make games. Traditionally, it's been video games, but as of late, I've been having a hand trying board games. And so I have a game, Liftoff, which I'm doing a Kickstarter with, which is a 2 to 5 player, about 45-minute casual game where you're working to be the first player to get all of your aliens off the planet. Basically, somebody's tripped over a wire, the whole thing's going to explode, and you need to work to get to the perimeter of the planet and find different liftoff points to take off and take your aliens to freedom. And the way the game works is initially everyone's sort of working together to pay the resources to take a rocket or UFO or even use a slingshot to get off the island, off the planet. But as things progress and somebody's sort of taking the lead or falling behind, suddenly the dynamics change and people are less apt to help each other and start being a little bit more nasty. And, it's meant to be the semi-cooperative competitive game where initially everyone's working together, much like you'd see on Survivor, but then eventually they're much more prone to getting off there on their own. Initially I had made Liftoff and was playing it and showing it to people, and I built a prototype, and I thought at first I was going to go the publisher route and actually started talking with people and spending some time, I sent the game to a publisher in Germany, and, it was sort of moving, but no one picked it up. And then I was working at Disney, and I just sort of ran out of time, and I didn't have time to sort of devote to dealing with the publisher and getting it done. And but a lot of people had played it, and during that period, sort of the Kickstarter movement had begun. And since tabletop has become such a clear, Kickstarter has become such a clear option for tabletop that I was talking to some of the people who played the game, and they were sort of like, "Why haven't you done a Kickstarter? You should do a Kickstarter for this." And it never really occurred to me. I mean, as a board game with modular pieces and these wooden aliens that are, at the time, they're hand painted and everything, sort of manufacturing on your own is expensive. I mean, it's like $30,000 to do all the pieces and all of it. And so, it just once they started suggesting Kickstarter, I decided, oh, hey, maybe I can do this, and discovered it was way more work than ever going through a publisher. So it's much more work, but I think it's the right choice. Being able to engage with backers and start to build a community around this product has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed even just prepping for the Kickstarter. So, it's interesting. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of research on Kickstarter and thinking about how to really, have the most successful Kickstarter possible. And it really drove at 2 key points. One was trying to make the initial, purchasing the board game as cheap as possible. And, making sure that the messaging in the Kickstarter was really clear. So I actually had a bunch of maybe stickers or other, extra things that you could get as rewards along the way. But in order to make sure I could get the cost down on the box, as well as really just streamline the approach, basically, if you back for $1, I'll save an alien in your honor. But otherwise, the next thing is the game, is Liftoff. In terms of stretch goals, there's a lot of great stretch goals. So actually, we are gonna be cutting out the meeples, but instead of painting them or using a silkscreen, use a sticker. So you'll get the character, the alien, and you get a sticker. You put it on, you have it. It looks like the alien. It's fun. But it's just not as great as having the painted one. So the first stretch goal is just getting enough money to have those silk screen that paints them on the wood, which would be fantastic. From there, the stretch goals allow us to improve and add components to the game which we would otherwise have to take out. We get to have a sort of player board where you save your aliens to, sort of like a mothership where you're saving them, and has some quick rules on it as well. We have some additional liftoff points, as well as some custom dice, rather than just using a standard dice. So a lot of components that just level up the experience and make it more fun and add more gameplay based on the stretch goals. So I think the hardest part of the design process is, so I come from video games. So in video games, you have this computer that's doing all the math, moving things around. It really makes your experience very accessible and easy to manage on your players. When you have a board game, you don't have any of that, right? I mean, you have different players, but each player needs to know sort of their score, where they're at, how their aliens or units are moving, and there's just much more having to do with the state of the board, your resources, how they, like how many moves you have, and so making sure that your experience is really clear to the user. They know, they know where they are, what they're doing. They can see it as it progresses, and they know how to win at all times. That's something that is much more specific to board games and card games that you don't really have to deal with quite as much in the video game space.
Okay.
So I think what sets Liftoff apart is sort of that idea I was saying before, where, first and foremost, I believe games should be fun and accessible. And I know we'll talk a little bit about accessibility from a disability standpoint, but just also from a ease of use, ease of play, something that anyone can sit down at the table and play, I think, and be successful the first time, right? I think there are a lot of games you have to play a couple times to be good at. And I don't have the opportunity to play the same game multiple times with the same group of people, right? You have game nights, you have other things with all these different people. I like a game where I can put it down, everyone can play, and everyone has fun the first time. And that was sort of a big part of Liftoff. And the second thing is this idea of working, the semi-cooperative work together element where we're all trying to get off the planet as fast as we can, but then this shift in dynamics where suddenly it becomes much more cutthroat and sort of take that, if you will. The board's also modular, so it's a unique board. It's a planet. It's round, and then each of these little shards that make the pie, if you will, like each pizza slice, can be removed and put back with different liftoff points. So you might start with a rocket ship, UFO, jetpack. And you might switch in a Stargate or switch in a miracle, or switch in a smoke signal, and they all play differently. So the game, the requirements, the resources are always shifting, but in a way that's unique to the pieces, right? So you don't have to know a lot of rules. The rules are very simple. It's just each piece creates new dynamics. That's a really good question. I think initially when people think about accessibility in games, and I think the first thing that everyone thinks about is just, making sure your game can, work for people who are colorblind, who have issues with color. And even sort of that, I know initially for me, I always thought colorblind as meaning that you see the world in black and white, but in reality, it means that you might mix up purple and blue, or have a hard time distinguishing between green and orange, green and red, and those types of things. And so, I think that's a starting point, of course. But I think, in terms of thinking about accessibility, and not even to say that Liftoff is perfect in any means. I'm sure it could even be improved. But thinking about how how the pieces are put together, how legible, the font and the writing might be, how much physical motion and maneuvering is required to play the game and to set up the game. I mean, these are all things that different people with different, um, disabilities have to deal with. And so I think the most important thing to think about is not, when you're making a game, your priority is the idea. You want to make the game, you want to have fun. And then you start moving towards making it as a product. And at that point, you're going to get feedback. Even if you didn't think about it, you're going to get feedback about, oh, I can't distinguish between these two pieces, or there's this other issue. And I think as somebody who's creating a game really for the enjoyment of everyone, I want everyone to be able to play Liftoff. I don't distinguish who I want to be able to play Liftoff. I think, it's important just to hear it, just to listen. And you can't necessarily, fix everything. You can't necessarily change everything. There's cost, there's time, there's all these considerations. But at a minimum, you need to be able to listen, understand the concern, understand the problem, and then decide if you're able to address it or not. Sure. Well, actually, I have two interesting things I can say there. One in terms of accessibility and the experience I had. So, in terms of accessibility in video games, you don't have as much physical, you don't have any physical components other than your controller or your screen. So, you don't have to worry about that as much as you do in board games, but you still need to be aware of, how people approach and understand your product, your game. Again, one of the things you look at, especially in sort of free-to-play mobile games, is this idea of people coming into your funnel, and you want them to be able to engage and play the experience as much as possible. So if they're confused along the way because of language issues, or because of colors, or just different types of visual problems, they get confused, they don't have fun, and then they fall out. So it's really important to make sure that everyone can get as far as possible through that funnel. The other interesting thing was when I was working at Blue Fang Games, our art director there, absolutely fantastic guy, Lou Catanzaro, he was actually deaf, and interestingly, deaf late in life. So I think I'm not sure, but in his 30s he went deaf, and so he's this loud Italian, highly verbal guy. He just can't hear you, and in the studio, there are actually a lot of people who didn't realize he was deaf, because when he walked around a movie, you'd have no idea. But in working with him, it really stretched, me as an individual, but the studio as a whole, as we were learning how to engage and work to, whether it be, like having conversations where I would be typing and he would be talking to me, and so he'd be talking, I'd be typing, and that's an interesting dynamic when you're having a discussion about art implementation against an engineering problem, right? So having an argument in that context is very different than sort of just having a quick chat, and making sure that we set up meetings so that he had an agenda, so that he had the information in advance, having people taking notes while the meeting was going on, and just working through all these different dynamics. But the thing was, he was fantastically talented. He drew and had a fantastic art team underneath him. He cared and mentored for them, great, and the artwork was fabulous. And I think it really, there's some things you have to understand and get used to. Like, he used to say, unless you know sign language, don't pretend like you can make gestures with your hands that make any sense. It'd be like, you never try to speak Japanese but not know Japanese and just make up Japanese sounds. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. And so treating sign language like a bunch of hand gestures that you think mean something, chances are you're saying different things to somebody who reads sign language. So, speak clearly, enunciate if you want, if he's doing lip reading, but otherwise just type or write. But don't try to sign if you have no idea how to sign. But Lou is fantastic working with him. Great. Sure. So Murder Crows, actually, I started a very long time ago. Actually, Thomas Denmark had started it. He originally made a fantasy game called Dungeoneer, which has had a number of updates and is a fantastic sort of lightweight dungeon crawl game. And he wanted to make very art intensive. He wanted to make a lightweight game a la sort of Uno that was quick to play, fun, and engaging. And he started at it with this idea of this game, Murder of Crows, where you spell the word murder in front of you. But initially he wanted to really just focus on the letters MURDER, and really wasn't terribly. Other than that, there wasn't an intent to be lots of illustration in the cards or heavy story elements. And so he had been working on it. And we were working at the same studio at the time, Mind Control Software, and I was asking about card, and I was getting into card and board games at the time, and was asking him about it, and he mentioned it, and we played it, and started giving him feedback. And I don't remember. I don't remember if he just wanted some support or we were just having fun. But he invited me to join him in terms of developing and making the game. And as I should take a second to say, Murder of Crows is a game where it's 2 to 5 players. You have a hand. You're spelling the word murder out in front of you, and as you do, different card effects are going off, and it's sort of like a take that game where you're trying to be the first to complete the murder. And as we were playing and talking and designing, it occurred to me that there might be an opportunity to make this actual spelling of the word murder actually tell a story of what murder occurred. So looking at it, we were like, well, you've got 2 R's, so you've got a victim and a killer, or killer and a victim, depending on how you write the sentence. And then we're like, okay, we can get mood, we can get weapon. And through working on it and thinking about it, we're actually able to construct a sort of procedural system that as you play, the sentence structure stays the same and allows you to have this ever-changing story underneath your play. And then when you complete, you get to read this murder and surprise everyone with what happened, because you're playing very dynamically as you go. And it was really interesting. Once we implemented that, the game sort of came alive, and it was really fun and dynamic. But then suddenly, talking about Abigail Lestrange or killing someone with a chopsticks or any of those things sort of fell flat on these cards that just had the letters. Yeah. And so, ultimately what happened is he ended up having to do art for every single card, the complete opposite of what he wanted. Mm-hmm. And it was actually in a style, you want it to be gothic, you want it to really ooze the theme. And he looked at Edward Gorey and Charles Adams's sort of inspiration, and ended up doing this style, which really isn't his natural style. I mean, most of the stuff like on the Dungeoneer side, the high fantasy is what he does mostly. But I think when you see it, he did an incredible job. I mean, talk about somebody sort of diving into this other style and making it his own and making it feel special. But so it was a really fun experience, but it took so long. We made the game. It took 7 years before bringing it to market. So it took a long time. But you've got to persevere and have fun, and I think it's quite an enjoyable game. Well, I mean, you asked about liftoff and accessibility. I mean, again, I think it's important to think about and work through as you're developing your game, but as you start getting feedback from people who are identifying things that you may have missed. Mm-hmm. When you design things, I think it takes you into interesting spaces as you consider these things. Consider your color choice. Consider your what your pieces are made of, consider your construction. So I think that's all very important as a developer or designer as you sort of progress through your game.